Growing for Market podcast.
The amount that egg prices were rising wasn't justified by the impact of avian flu and its depopulations. And we saw, and we don't have access to everything, but looking at like publicly available information, we could see things like we looked at Cal-Maine controls about 20% of, it's the biggest egg producer in the US. They're a publicly traded company. So we can see all their financial reportings. While these prices are spiking, they start doing things like reporting quarterly profits that are larger than what they would typically report in a year. Their profits are skyrocketing. And so we look for things like that and try to hold the bad, when in those instances, draw attention to it, hold bad actors accountable, try to advocate for more fair policies and enforcement of existing laws on deck.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm April Parms Jones, your host and a writer for Growing for Market magazine. For 33 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait until you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people to find the podcast. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Rimmel greenhouses are proudly built right here in America and shipped to anywhere in the U.S. With technical sales staff members located across the country, many with growing experience, the Rimmel Greenhouses team of experts will serve as your trusted partner every step of the way to ensure that you get exceptional value from your greenhouse investment. Visit Rimmel.com to get a quote today. Local Line is the most popular software platform for farmers and food hubs selling direct to consumer. With features like e-commerce, inventory management, subscriptions, and box builder, Local Line helps you grow sales, save time, and streamline your operations. In fact, last year, farms that used Local Line grew their sales by 23%. Ready to switch to a proven sales software that does it all? Local Line has no setup fees, no commissions, and will migrate your storefront for free, so you'll be up and running in no time. As a GFM podcast listener, Local Line is offering a free premium feature for 1 year with your subscription using the coupon code GFM2025. Don't wait. Start your season off the right way with Local Line.
Thank you so much for joining us today at Growing for Market podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of having Sarah Carden of Farm Action. Farm Action is about raising awareness and advocating for policies that meaningfully reform the nation's food and agriculture system. Sarah holds a BA in evolutionary biology from Harvard University, and she is working on food systems and reforming those food systems for over a decade. She brings expertise in the local food systems and distribution networks, agriculture, nonprofit development, and food entrepreneurship. Sarah has also worked as an organizer on 2 presidential campaigns, and she lives with her husband and their 2 young children on their organic vegetable farm. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, April.
So we're going to start off the podcast talking a little bit about what was the draw of bringing you into agriculture.
So I ended up in agriculture a little accidentally, but I had been on an academic path to study biological systems and evolutionary pathways, and had done quite a bit of field research and just along the course started spending some time on some farms, and in particular farms that were sort of mission aligned as far as their growing practices, and really just got the bug. It was, for me, it was a way to apply a lot of the knowledge I had gained in an interactive way. Research is very observational based. I am not known as a hands-off person. So it was, and from there, really just launched, it opened the doors to me into the full spectrum of food systems and production and the challenges we face, and started to build with a lot more intentionality at that point.
That's amazing. And then how did you decide to go into your field of study when you were at Harvard?
Well, at Harvard, I was always very interested in the distinction between humans and the rest of the animal world, and what that meant and how that happened, and ended up in those questions and explorations really honing in on, language being one of these really big differentials of how expressive our language is, and then what does that mean, and started looking into both the neurological and evolutionary adaptations that accompanied that. And Harvard does some of the leading research in that space, and so had a lot of opportunity there to really get in on that.
That's exciting. And I think that when you think about farming, it really does have a lot of scientific components. And so you do have to use your knowledge of nature, but also your knowledge of science. And so how do you interweave your knowledge from science into your farming practices?
Yeah, and I was originally studying earth sciences. And, when I went to college, this concept of, environmental sciences was really just emerging, and there wasn't as many programs on that. I think had I gone now, would have been where I started, but I was looking at systems and how systems interact and ecosystems. And I bring a lot of that to our farm management, as well as the evolutionary background. I view that is something that is very fully ingrained in me, is we have everything is the way it is based on these evolutionary pressures, which are not always intuitive, right? It's a different way of viewing everything. And within that context of management, appreciating that that's how you create systems that will thrive, is creating opportunities for the traits. For instance, if we're going to apply this to agriculture, the traits that you're going after to be able to reproduce and thrive, and the organisms, and not encouraging the evolution of, pest resist, things that are going to, everything's going to always evolve and adapt. So, doing the same thing repeatedly, it's inevitable. If we look at more conventional practices, if you're going to spray the same herbicide year after year, you will undoubtedly develop resistant plant weeds. It's just, that is evolution. So I sort of look at it all from that lens always.
Absolutely. And I agree with you totally. As we're thinking about our growing systems, we can think of them as an ecosystem and how they're all sort of interconnected. And it's the same with language, like you talked about earlier. With language, we're all interconnected with our ways of communicating. And so thinking about that ecosystem, we have to really be careful about what we're putting into our land, how we're planning out our growing patterns, and making sure that we're really mitigating for pests, because they are ferocious. So can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do with Farm Action?
Sure. So I don't know, maybe it would be helpful to give a little context to background on Farm Action, and then I can speak to my role. So Farm Action is a nonpartisan agricultural watchdog organization that is led by farmers. Most of the staff are farmers. We approach all of this from a sort of farmer first lens, and we focus on advocating for accountability from both our government and large corporations within the agricultural sector. So, with that in mind, we have a vision that we work towards of a fair, sustainable, healthy food system that empowers farmers and workers and rural communities to feed our communities. And my role there at Farm Action is I lead the research and policy development department. And so What that means is I develop both I follow a lot of what is happening to farmers across the country. I look, we have certain areas and issues that we develop research on and then help develop policies to help address these. And we often think of ourselves as, you see in the news, in the mainstream media, a lot about trade industry ag groups. And, they fail to represent the full spectrum of farmers a lot of the time, and their interests. And I think that we do a really good job of broadening the scope of what we're looking for. We advocate for a very full, resilient food system that really has benefits to a wider audience.
That sounds like really exciting work. I mean, you have a lot of prongs here. I was writing little notes. So I'm like, oh, lots of notes to cover. So that's exciting. So can we start off talking about the research? I think this is the first time that I've had a person on the podcast that is involved in farmer research. And I know our listeners would be very interested to see what goes into research and how does that affect later on the policy.
Yeah. So, I can give some examples of some of the research that we do here. So, one of the things, a lot of our thought stems from empowering the public with knowledge. We see the narrative being controlled quite a bit by large, like I mentioned, large trade groups, industrial, sort of the big ag complex. And so we work a lot on checking that and looking into it. So for instance, when we talk about accountability, we can talk about eggs because that's very sort of fresh in everybody's mind. Eggs are very expensive right now. They have been. One of the kinds of work we do is when we see egg prices starting to go up, or other like ag related prices, but in this case, when we saw egg prices going up, we look at why is this happening? We hear avian flu, and that's what I'm referring to when I talk about sort of the mainstream narrative. But we don't necessarily take that for face value, and we start digging deeper and looking at what's happening. And so we did an investigation into eggs, and what we found when we did that in this case was, avian flu is absolutely real. It's a real crisis. This isn't a negation of that. But we saw the amount that egg prices were rising wasn't justified by the impact of avian flu and its depopulations. And we saw, and we don't have access to everything, but looking at like publicly available information, we could see things like we looked at Cal-Maine controls about 20% of, it's the biggest egg producer in the US. They're a publicly traded company. So we can see all their financial reportings. While these prices are spiking, they start doing things like reporting quarterly profits that are larger than what they would typically report in a year. Their profits are skyrocketing. And so we look for things like that and try to hold the bad, when in those instances, draw attention to it, hold bad actors accountable, try to advocate for more fair policies and enforcement of existing laws on deck.
That's a very important work because eggs are really a vital part of what we use to nourish our own bodies. I know I personally used to go through like 24 eggs in a week because I was like boiling them in like cakes and cookies, and then also pancakes and so many things, right? And so today I used an egg. I made some meatloaf it wasn't actually meatloaf. It was making stuffed peppers. So it was like a meatloaf filling that I was putting in the peppers, and I used an egg. And so they are a really important part of our nourishment. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
Spring is here, and CSA season is in full swing. If you're ready to grow your CSA and reclaim your time, Farmhand is here to help. With built-in marketing and subscription tools that automate everything from customer support and newsletters to weekly add-ons and billing, Farmhand helps you delegate the busy work so you can stay focused on the farm. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers over 10 hours a week. That's 10 extra hours to spend with your family, in the field, or just taking a well-earned breather. Set up a one-to-one demo with Ari, Farmhand's founder and a farmer himself. He'll show you exactly how to streamline your operations, grow your CSA, and stay competitive, all with tools designed for small farms. Make this your most profitable season yet. Get started at farmhand.partners/GFM. That's farmhand.partners/GFM.
And now back to the show. Now, for our readers, how can they utilize research and find research? Say they are a flower grower and they want to find research on the benefits of flowers. How would they go about taking steps to do that?
Sure. So, that is not the service that like we would typically provide, but there's so many resources out there and you can look at various, I don't know that I would necessarily say I'm an expert at the different sources, but in that instance, I would definitely recommend working with your local extension offices, and universities offer, public universities have a wealth of resources. And then, if you get into the the depths of internet research, it helps to find, a couple folks who really resonate with you and start to look at their resources and where they're getting their information from. I always talk about the importance of using primary sources because there's not, the internet has made a little bit of a lack of accountability for information you put out there. So following, when you find out information on the internet, which is where most people go to turn these days, following that trail, backing into where that information comes from, and keeping a fresh lens is something that I also always think is important. So interpreting, trying to interpret the research or the data for yourself, you can, instead of necessarily always relying on others, I think is where you're going to find a lot of strength in that's how you develop original ideas. And it's a good practice just for checking, we can all sort of fall victim to just following the media and listening to what we're told, and understanding where that information comes from is critical.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like getting to the root of a plant, right? Mm-hmm. So then you can see like, oh, okay, the roots are going all this way and that way. And that lets you really see the whole clearer picture. I know we have a funny story. My mother has like a 1910 house in East Akron, Ohio, and we were having some issues with like backup. And then the guy came out and he like cleared it all the way to the road, which was like 150 feet. So of course that was extra money. And then we're like, oh no. And then there were roots of the tree that we had way, way far at the tip of the property. Those roots had gone all the way into our beautiful clay pipes and were causing trouble. And so I was like, that's exactly what you're saying. You see the beautiful tree far, far away, but you have to go down all the way to the roots to make sure you're getting something that's clear and legit and something that resonates, like you said, with what you want to move forward in.
Absolutely. And it will help you apply it to your own practices better, right? Because nobody, in that instance, for nobody, it's very unusual to find somebody who is doing what you want to do in the exact environment you're trying to do it. So to understand the basis for this information makes it much easier to apply it in your context. And
absolutely. And I love the idea of actually researching, finding information, and then sharing it with your customers or with your community about the benefits of whatever you're growing and why it's important, how it helps health-wise, how it can, uplift your mood, how it can bring beauty and joy to your spirit. I mean, I'm not sure if there's a study on that, but, there's...
I mean, and that's a big part of what Farm Action does, is try to be a resource. I mean, not in that example, but for instance, we just launched the Agricultural Consolidation Hub, which is knowledge is truth. And so we do a lot of work that is based off this premise that our food system is very highly consolidated, and this has pushed out opportunities for fair competition and the implications of that. And we realized that the foundation of all of this was very hard for the public to access, to understand what does concentration mean, what do CR4 ratios mean, where do they come from? When we say, meat packing is really concentrated, like what does that really mean? And so we created this database that's very transparent and shows, You can look through all the different industries in our food system, from inputs to processing and trading to markets, and to even into like the finance, like credit and risk management, and see what that concentration looks like. Who are these major players, and even get into how does that impact public? How does it impact farmers? How does it impact consumers? And so that's a big part of what we do, and what my job is there, is getting that information together to make it available to people and empower them.
That's an awesome point that you're making, is that the consolidation of our food system is causing more control by these large corporations. And so that impacts us all, because the prices, if they sow well, the prices can go up because they have more control over the market.
Precisely.
And that's very impactful. Yeah, that's very impactful for us. And I think that that's something that growers of vegetables and herbs and flowers can also communicate with their customers, of how they are really enriching their own community and enriching, their neighbor and their friend, and a food system that they want to support, compared to many producers working and producing, compared to one huge producer that has more control.
Yeah. And I think that, in the sort of direct consumer sales market, that is something that really producers could be emphasizing more. I think a lot of farmers really push on their quality, right? And that you can come and get under you can have a guarantee of certain growing practices, and you're getting it fresh within like 24 hours of harvest. But also, with the consolidation in retail and the loss of real vast majority of sort of independent grocery stores, there's a really good, compelling argument too to make that by supporting farmers, you're keeping your money locally. It's getting reinvested into your community. It's not, versus if you go to Walmart and that's out the door, that's going back. That's not gonna do much except for your community. Whereas, these farmers are banking locally. Their kids are at schools locally. They're engaging, and that makes a huge impact for a rural economy or for an urban economy.
Absolutely. And then, the whole new trend now is that people want stronger, more robust, interesting communities, but also they want children in those communities for the next generation. Yeah. So this is really a good point, is that you're really investing in the farmer who's going to invest into the future generations. And yeah, that's amazing work. And it's great that you guys have a resource for people to go and look and kind of see and get a bigger picture of what's going on in this industrialized food system. So can we talk about policy? We talked a little bit about the research. I would love to talk about some of the policy work that you guys are doing.
Sure. So for the last couple of years, we had been very focused on, I guess we're in a little bit of a transition moment, because we have a new administration. Previously, we had worked quite a bit towards a farm bill campaign, which never happened and is sort of still indefinitely being postponed. So right now we are focused on a number of different fronts, ranging from our two focuses right now are really holding our government and big corporations accountable. What I mean by that is the Honor Farmers Contracts Act that Senator Booker recently introduced, which is looking at all of these funding freezes that producers have been facing with contracts that were signed with the government, calling for the government to meet its commitment in these honor its commitment and pay farmers for the work that they have committed to paying them for. Stuff like that, holding them accountable. We do quite a bit of work on reforming the agricultural commodities programs, the commodity checkoff programs, which market growers may not be as familiar with, but probably should be, because, this is a mandatory tax that, producers of 22 or so commodities have to pay into on farmers when they sell. So for instance, like every time you sell a cow, you pay $1 checkoff fee, and those funds are supposed to be used for general commodity promotion and research, but we have seen a huge misuse of these funds, and we've seen a lot of this. And they also are illegally being used in many instances to really further the needs of industry instead of the producers. And so it's an important issue for us to make sure that they're being used as they should be, and checking that accountability. We work a lot on labeling integrity. So country of, in order for, producers work hard to create new markets for themselves because existing markets are so consolidated, and working to make sure that when labels are created, that they are maintained. We advocate aggressively for stronger country of origin labeling, mandatory. So on like beef and pork, mandatory country of origin labeling, and then we're watching things like this trade war, and just, we're in a lot of active monitoring right now to make sure that we are working at that, somebody's looking out on behalf of the farmer in all of this.
And that's something that's very interesting, is that you're saying that the policies can change so quickly based on administration to administration. But then also, is it the same? Are you seeing any of that at the state level, where, say, you get a new governor? Is it as quick, do you think, of a change as at the federal level, or is it more consistent?
Well, I would also step back and say the policies aren't changing by administration. It's more of our focus. You have to, what is attainable? What are your vehicles? So like I said, a lot of the vehicles for major agricultural policy shifts are in the Farm Bill, but the Farm Bill has been pushed off. And so, that campaign is still very, our recommendations for that haven't shifted. They just are a little, we're working on them, but they're not a priority when there is no Farm Bill to put them in. So, working on, but whereas right now, for instance, the previous administration hadn't frozen a lot of contracts. And so that, new issues arise under new circumstances. And I think on this, there is every election cycle, there is a moment, and this would apply both on the federal and the state level, where different officials have different priorities, and there is going to be more opportunities in certain areas. But our sort of founding core principles and the policies we recommend, those stay consistent. It's just kind of which strategies you're employing when that shifts.
I love that idea of just like thinking about it as an opportunity to employ different strategies, because like you said, each administration has different ideas and concepts that they want to promote and that they want to put ahead of the pack, I guess we could say. And so as a grower, if you align with some of those things, and that's also an opportunity for you to be ahead of the pack and working on those issues that align with that certain politician. And so that's an awesome way to look at it. So there are opportunities for growers to align themselves with things that align with their spirit, and then also align with whatever new administration may be in office.
Oh, well, I was just going to say one other thing that would be very relevant probably to your audience that we work on is on enhancing supports for specialty fruit and vegetable producers. We, and this is really comes from our Farm Bill campaign, but we have seen language and some interest from this administration on this front too. So there is also other opportunities for this, but just looking at the lens that there is a disproportionate amount of support for certain production systems, for certain productions, and in particular, these healthier foods and fruits and vegetables, as an example, have a lot less support than some other production crops. And that is doing a number of things. One is in just contrast with our dietary recommendations, and also driving an agricultural trade deficit where we, for the bulk of history have been sort of an agricultural trade powerhouse and always exported more than we import. And in the last recent few, 5-6 years, that has shifted, and we now import more than we're exporting. And that's really been driven by sort of growing reliance on imported fruits and vegetables. And so we have a number of concerns with that imbalance and are working on making, a lot of developing policies that will make it a more friendly market for fruit and vegetable producers.
Now, that's very interesting. I love that idea. I have never heard that, so that's new to me. But that's really great information because, and then when I think about it, when I go to the grocery store, I'm very crunchy granola and I'm very frugal. And I live in Ohio, so lots of frugal people. I'm with my people, but I normally don't buy that much fruit in the wintertime because the quality in my mind isn't as great. And then the prices are really high. And I'm like just a little price adverse. And when I was growing up as a little girl in Akron, Ohio, we just ate in season. So when the fall and the winter came, we were eating more like root vegetables, like rutabagas and turnips and beets, lots of potatoes. And that's just we kind of shit and cabbages. So things we just kind of shifted our diet more towards the fall, winter crops. And then when the spring came, we had beautiful strawberries and blueberries and raspberries and oranges and, just like everything was available. And so I kind of stayed consistent to that. But now when you do go to the grocery store, you see lots of fruits. You see them all the time, whether it's the dead of winter, whether it's hot in the summer. And we are importing those. It's an excellent point.
Well, that is true. And there's, I'm absolutely an advocate of eating more seasonally and freeze your fruits in the summer so you have them. And that's a big part of it. But what's particularly frightening about this agricultural trade deficit is it's not exclusively driven by sort of this idea that we should have strawberries year round and trying to bring unseasonal products in. We're importing massive amounts of crops into places that have those crops in season. Washington is bringing in apples from China during the peak of Washington apple season. Like, we bring in a huge amount of tomatoes from Canada. This isn't just a seasonality thing. This is a kind of, Georgia, Florida producers are really having issues because their harvest season coincides with a lot of the harvest season in Mexico, and the market, they just get flooded out by imports from Mexico. And those producers are getting driven, getting driven off their farms or changing crops because it can't compete. Mexico has a different, supports their specialty crop producers in a much more substantial way. They have a very different labor situation. And so it's crazy because it's not even just, it's not just us trying to season extension. It's a lot more of just offshoring these more labor intensive productions.
Oh, wow. That's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah. I would encourage everybody to, when you're at a grocery store, they all have to label their country of origin. Fruits and vegetables are under country of origin labeling requirements. So kind of pay attention to, you go in there in the summer and look at where everything's coming from, and you might be surprised.
Yeah, that's good to know. And that's something that producers of food can communicate and talk about and say, once again, you're supporting your local community. You can find me, you can see me. I'm not far, far away, and support me. Yeah, because that's a really important thing. And what I also see is that there's so much pride in when you grow your food locally. There's just a pride and a history and a culture and memories that are attached, especially when you're connected directly to the producer, that you can't replicate when the person is far, far away. And then the producer can also tell you tips like, this is what I do with this crop. This is how I grow it. This is how I preserve it. This is how I cook it. And, you can't get that far, far away.
Nope, that's true.
So this goes back to labeling. So the labeling is at the federal level, you're saying, of the country of origin. You talked earlier about label integrity. Mm-hmm. Can you give me a little more information about that?
Yeah. So, when we talk about country of origin labeling, which is sort of one example of labeling integrity, when there is no mandated requirement like I said, there is for fruits and vegetables, but there isn't for beef and pork, any mandated requirement to label the country of origin, which puts our domestic producers at a severe disadvantage because there's a lot of polling and consumer research that demonstrates that consumers are interested in supporting domestic producers, but it's not, that information is often intentionally obscured. So a policy we were very worked on for years and years and years was Product of USA, which is a voluntary, not mandatory label that goes on meat and poultry products that says, Product of USA. And the requirements for far too long allowed meat packers to import beef from Argentina or Mexico. It just had to pass through at some point a USDA facility to get that Product of USA label. So that was, to me, a very intentional, there was research that showed, when you see Product of USA on a steak, you're going to assume that's a cow raised in the US, but it wasn't more often than not. And some of the major meat packers were really using that to, mislead consumers and disadvantage American producers. So we worked, and advocated, and we had a big celebration in a couple of years ago. I think it was a year ago now. Time is doing weird things these days. When the Biden administration actually passed and finalized a rule that clarified that Product of USA in label. To be eligible for that, you needed to be not only processed in the US, but also born, hatched, or whatnot, raised, and everything in the US. So that's the type of, that's another example of the labeling integrity campaign that we worked on.
So thinking about that for small producers, would you feel like there would be an impact of positive opportunity for them to also label, like, this is made in Akron, Ohio, or made in Wisconsin, or made in New York, and just really adding in that extra labeling to their product? Would that help give people clarity about, oh, this is a local product? If they had labeling at all, I'm saying.
Yeah, I think, if you're doing direct sales, some of that conversation is happening with or without. I think it would never hurt. But labels are particularly important when there's an intermediary between the producer, and even when there's not an intermediary, to be honest, because there is a verification. So for instance, my vegetable farm is certified organic, and that's very, we don't actually do direct sale we sell to intermediaries. So that's particularly important in our case, because how else is a consumer without verification going to be able to? I think in a direct sales, you have an opportunity to build trust with your consumer and to maintain that trust. However, it never hurts to have enhanced that consumer's trust and have, if you can have third-party audits that verify it, that's another level. And I think that's a little bit for each producer to discern what their market is. We ran a CSA farm for years and years and didn't pursue certification at the time because the pickup was at our farm. So it was very transparent what was happening there.
Who doesn't love a good CSA? It's CSA season. My favorite season of all.
I don't know if CSA farmers feel that way. Yeah.
I know. It's so much work for the farmer, but for the customer, it's like Christmas. It's a holiday. It's 4th of July, every pickup. And some places like CSA has changed. When I was a little girl, it was like, you get what you get, be thankful.
Yeah.
There's no list. It was like a vague list, but it wasn't like, you couldn't say, oh no, I don't want this, I want more of that. No, it was like, this is it. Now there's so many types of CSAs. People can order directly exactly what they want, or they can opt out and opt in, and so much. But yeah, a CSA is really a gift to the community.
No, they have come quite a long way. I remember we started CSA farming like 15 years ago, and I will never forget one of the we did a lot of work with our customers, and one of them had told us how she used to run when she saw her CSA delivery coming because she just didn't want any more beets, and she knew there would be more beets in there. Okay. Not from us, from a different farm, but that that's what, in the sort of more old school system of, you're going to get this and you're going to come take this no matter what.
Exactly. Well, now beets are very popular. They're like hot, trendy, sexy. People are doing the beet salads, the baked beet with goat cheese.
I'm embarrassed to say
beet
that.
Juice.
Now, probably.
Yeah, I know. The power of a root vegetable totally has changed. So that's interesting. Yeah, it's really important as you're thinking about, like you said, labeling and how impactful it is. And the consumer expects it to be truthful and honest, and that they need to have an awareness and an education, especially regarding, you said, the beef and the pork. That
Well, and I think there's a lot of examples. In general, consumers should, we all sort of assume that labels are all maintained, but there is a lot, consumers should do some education there, because certain labels have no enforcement and are completely unregulated and could mean a whole different, a lot of different things. But labels, so we do a lot of work on that. Labels that are regulated and federally enforced should meet the standards that they have been, set out to meet.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, as we are starting to conclude our conversation, what are some of your things that you're excited about in the work that you're doing in creating a fair and sustainable food system with Farm Action?
Well, let's see. I think what I'm most like more broadly excited about is, I've been running a farm since 2010, so it's 15 years now, I guess, and it's a challenge, right? I mean, it really is, and every year it's a kind of a conversation of how do we keep this going, and what is really impactful is that the work we do, one, shines a lot of light to me on why it's so challenging. For a long time, I felt like those challenges were personal failures. We should have been more efficient, or something we were doing wrong. And I have the work we're doing provides a lot of information on why it's challenging, and that it isn't the producer. It's a very challenging market to be a farmer in. And doing that also is, like I said, once you know the root of the problem, it's a lot clearer how to address it and working on those shifts. And so it's, I feel very lucky to be able to work and advocate for these policies that have, the potential to really make a better system and opportunity for farmers across the country.
I agree with you. I think it's important to actually know that we're all living in a system, right? And that system definitely has impacts, small and large, on our lives. And the more that we know about the system and what's going on, it gives us more encouragement, more faith, more skills to advocate for ourselves and to, like you said earlier, take the opportunities that are presented to us to grow and to expand. But we have to know and have the education and the research and know the policies that are happening so that we can take those opportunities when they appear. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on Growing for Market. Our listeners have become learners, and we've learned so much from your wealth of knowledge that you've given us, and you've given myself personally a great new perspective on how to look at farming. And you've also given our listeners a great resource. They can check out Farm Action and all the work that you guys are doing, and look at the different studies that you have on research and policy. So I appreciate you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me, April. I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or review. It really helps others to find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business, operations, and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days, and you'll never get build. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 per year. You'll get a year of the magazine plus 150 back issues from the last 15 years. Head over to Growing for Market and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers for farmers and Growing for Market magazine.